Two young fish are swimming along, and an older fish passes the other way and nods. "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The two young fish swim on, and after a while, one turns to the other and asks, "What the hell is water?" That's you. That's all of us. We're swimming in a set of invisible assumptions we never chose and never notice, and they quietly decide what we see, what we ignore, and what we miss completely. Shane Parrish calls those missing pieces blind spots, and he opens this book with a line that sounds almost too simple. In life and in business, the person with the fewest blind spots wins. Not the smartest person, not the one with the highest IQ, the one who sees the most of reality. This book hands you 9 lenses to see the water you're swimming in, and by the end, one of these 9 tools will put a single quiet officer on a Soviet submarine, with the fate of the entire planet resting on whether he assumes the worst. Stay for that. Here's the trap. We think clear thinking is about being brilliant. It isn't. Charlie Munger put it this way: "It's remarkable how much long-term advantage people get simply by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent." So why do smart people stay blind? Parrish points to 3 cracks in how we see. The first is perspective. Picture Galileo's ship sailing at a steady speed, no windows. You drop a ball and it falls straight down, obviously. But a fish watching from outside sees that same ball also slide 20 feet sideways as the ship moves. You couldn't see it because you were standing inside the thing you were trying to judge. The second crack is ego, the part of us that would rather be right than get it right. And the third is distance. Touch a hot stove and you learn instantly. The pain updates you on the spot. But make a decision other people carry out, far from its consequences, and you can fool yourself for years. 3 cracks, and every one of them keeps the map in your head from matching the world outside. The Greeks told a story about this. Antaeus was a giant, the son of the earth herself, and he challenged every traveler to wrestle. He never lost, because the instant his opponent hit the dirt, Antaeus only grew stronger. His power flowed up out of the ground. Then came Heracles. Round after round he threw the giant down, and round after round the giant rose stronger, until Heracles saw it. He stopped trying to pin Antaeus to the earth, and instead lifted him off it. Cut off from the ground, the giant's strength drained away, and he was finished. That's the whole game. Your understanding is only as strong as its contact with reality. Lift an idea off the ground, stop testing it against the real world, and it dies in your hands, even if it feels invincible. So keep your feet on the ground. Now, here are the 9 lenses. And the first one is the reason your feet slip in the first place. Early in Amazon's life, Jeff Bezos is sitting in a weekly business review, and something doesn't add up. Customers are complaining loudly about how long they wait on hold for support. But the report in front of him, the data, the map, says the average wait time is under 60 seconds. Everything's fine, on paper. So Bezos does something the map never tells you to do. He picks up the phone in the middle of the meeting, dials the customer service line himself, and waits. And waits. Over 10 minutes pass in front of the whole room. His point lands without a word. The map was lying. This is the first mental model, and it's the ground under all the others. The map is not the territory. A map, a metric, a resume, a financial statement, a stereotype, is a reduction of reality, useful precisely because it leaves things out. But the moment you forget it's a reduction, you stop looking at the world and start worshiping the drawing of it. And that's when you walk straight off the cliff the map didn't show. There's a second danger, and it's sneakier. Maps go stale. For centuries, Newton's physics was a magnificent map of the universe, until 1905, when a patent clerk named Einstein redrew it. Newton wasn't wrong, exactly. He was a map that reality had quietly outgrown. Territories change faster than the maps that describe them, so reality always gets the final say. It's the ultimate update. And here's the twist most people miss. Usually, you didn't even draw your own map. You inherited it from experts, pundits, teachers, headlines. Someone else compressed the world for you and handed you the summary, which means every map carries the fingerprints of its maker. Think of the confident hire with the flawless resume, who checks every box and still can't do the job. The resume was a beautiful map of a territory that wasn't there. So when you can't survey the ground yourself, Parrish says, Do the one thing you can. Choose your cartographer wisely. Imagine a man who has spent his whole life in one small town. Call him the lifer. He knows every family, every feud, every secret, who owes whom, where the bodies are buried, exactly how high the water rose the year the river flooded. Now a sharp visitor arrives from the big city. Within 3 days, the stranger is sure he's got the place figured out. He's not even close. And the gap between them is the second model, the circle of competence. Inside your circle, you have real, hard-won knowledge, and you see problems in 3 dimensions. Step outside it, and you don't just lose your edge. You don't even know what you don't know. Nowhere is that deadlier than Mount Everest. There are roughly 200 bodies still on that mountain, preserved by the cold, and not one of those climbers thought it would take their life. For the rest of us, Everest is a place we can read about but not survive. Which is why, since the very first ascents, climbers have leaned on the Sherpas, people like Tenzing Norgay, who spent 20 years learning that mountain before he stood on top of it. The size of your circle doesn't matter. Knowing where its edge is, that's everything. Warren Buffett loves telling the story of Rose Blumkin, a Russian immigrant who spoke almost no English and could barely read or write. She understood exactly 2 things cold: numbers and furniture. So that's where she stayed, and she built the Nebraska Furniture Mart into one of the great stores in America. Buffett said he couldn't have handed her Berkshire stock because she didn't understand stocks. She understood carpets, so she bought carpets and won. But here's the honest problem. You can't stay inside your circle all the time. Life forces you to make calls in places you're a stranger. So what do? Look at Queen Elizabeth I, inheriting a broke, fractured England at 25. Instead of pretending she knew it all, her first move was a sentence. I mean to direct all my actions by good advice and counsel. She built a small, arguing, honest advisory council and turned a crumbling kingdom into an empire. When you're outside your circle, learn the basics, borrow other people's circles, and always, always remember to consider who's drawing your map. Hand a child a house made of Lego and watch what happens. Most adults, given the same house, nudge a few bricks and call it an improvement. The child dumps the whole thing on the floor, and now it's not a slightly better house. It's a spaceship, a bridge, anything at all. That's first principles thinking. The third model. You take a problem apart, all the way down, separating what is actually, provably true from what everyone just assumes is true. What's left, the pieces that can't be broken down further, those are your first principles, and you rebuild from there. Because here's the unlock Parrish keeps returning to: almost everything that isn't a law of nature is just a shared belief. Money is a shared belief. A border is a shared belief. That's how it's always been done, is a shared belief. How do you find the real bedrock? 2 tools. You question like Socrates, relentlessly asking how you know what you think you know. Or you do what a 4-year-old does at dinner and just keep asking why, level after level, until you hit either a fact you can test or an assumption pretending to be a fact. For most of a century, doctors knew one thing for certain: nothing could live in the human stomach. Too acidic, sterile. It was a first principle, taught as bedrock. So when patients came in with agonizing ulcers, no one ever looked for an infection. They blamed stress and told people to relax. Then 2 Australians, Robin Warren and Barry Marshall, looked anyway and found bacteria thriving in stomach after stomach. The sterile stomach was never a first principle at all. It was an assumption wearing a first principle's clothes. They spent years being rejected by their entire profession before the world caught up. In 2005, they won the Nobel Prize, and today, an ulcer is cured with antibiotics instead of a lifetime of misery. The scientist Temple Grandin puts the lesson in one line. She revolutionized how cattle are handled, and when researchers questioned one of her famous designs, she didn't flinch, because the design was never the point. The principle was reducing the animal's stress. If you know the principles, she said, you can change the tactics. Master the fundamentals, and you're never trapped by the way things have always been done. Albert Einstein couldn't build a laboratory in outer space, so he built one in his head. Imagine you're sealed in an elevator, feet on the floor, no windows. Can you tell whether you're resting on Earth in gravity's grip or being hauled upward through empty space at a steadily increasing speed? Einstein ran the experiment in his mind and concluded, you can't. The two feel identical. And from that impossible elevator, he reasoned his way to the general theory of relativity, our modern understanding of gravity itself. That's the fourth model, the thought experiment, the sandbox of the mind. It lets you run tests reality won't let you run, and you already do a version of it. Ask yourself, in a game of one-on-one basketball, who wins, LeBron James or the filmmaker Woody Allen? You didn't call them up. You simulated the game in your head instantly, and you'd bet everything on LeBron. But now, change one name, LeBron versus Kevin Durant. Suddenly you'd hesitate to bet $1. Same tool, but now it's showing you the exact edge of what you actually know. Buffett has a favorite one he calls the ovarian lottery. Picture yourself 24 hours before you're born. A genie lets you design all the rules of society, the laws, the economy, everything. There's just one catch. You don't get to know who you'll be, rich or poor, man or woman, born in a stable country or a war zone. You reach into a barrel and pull out one ball, blind. Suddenly, the fair society you design looks very different, and you feel, in your gut, how much of your life was handed to you by luck before you did a single thing. Now use the same lens on your own decisions. Say you put $100,000 into a stock, half of it borrowed, and it doubles. You tripled your money. You feel like a genius. But run the world again in your head 100,000 times. In how many of those runs does the stock drop first? The loan gets called, and you're wiped out? The thought experiment strips away the flattering outcome and shows you the truth underneath, whether you were actually smart or just lucky this time. Colonial Delhi has a cobra problem, so the British government offers a bounty. Bring in a dead cobra, get paid. Simple, clever, done. Except the locals do the math the officials didn't and start breeding cobras to cash in. When the scheme collapses and the bounty ends, the breeders release their now worthless snakes. Delhi ends up with more cobras than when it started. That is a failure of the fifth model, second-order thinking. Almost anyone can see the immediate result of an action. Second-order thinking asks the harder question, the one the British forgot. And then what? What are the consequences of the consequences? We feed antibiotics to livestock to make meat cheaper. First order, it works. In second order, we breed bacteria our own medicines can't kill. As the ecologist Garrett Hardin warned, you can never merely do one thing. Everything is hitched to everything else. Buffett paints it perfectly. It's a crowd at a parade, and one person stands on tiptoe to see better. So the next person does. Soon, everyone is straining on their toes, and nobody sees any better than before. Sometimes second-order thinking means choosing pain now for something far bigger later. In 48 BC, Cleopatra is 21, ousted from the palace, stranded in a swamp, with a brother actively trying to have her killed. Then Julius Caesar arrives in Egypt. She has a choice, and every option is dangerous. She aligns with Caesar, and she almost certainly knows the first-order cost. It will enrage her brother and inflame her own people. It does. It triggers a civil war that traps her under siege for months. But she's not playing for next week. She's playing for the throne, and on the far side of that short-term agony, Cleopatra rules Egypt, backed by Rome, for nearly 2 decades. One caution, though, don't let this tip into paralysis. If you followed every chain of consequences to its darkest possible end, you'd never take a single drink, never drive a car, never do anything at all. Yes, the first beer could technically lead to ruin, but not most of the time. Second-order thinking is about the likely consequences of the consequences, not an endless slide into imagined catastrophe. Here's a headline. Violent stabbings on the rise. Your pulse jumps. Should it? The sixth model, probabilistic thinking, says, don't react to the number in front of you. Weigh it against everything you already know. Say your odds of being stabbed last year were 1 in 10,000. The headline is true. The rate has doubled. Your odds are now 2 in 10,000. Still practically nothing. Feeding new information through what you already know, that's Bayesian thinking. And it quietly dissolves a lot of fear. But probability has a trap on the other side, and it's the dangerous one. Most of the world behaves like a gentle bell curve. heights, exam scores, clustered safely around the average. You will never meet a man 10 times taller than average. But some things live in what Nassim Taleb calls fat tails: wealth, wars, market crashes, where a single extreme event has no cap at all. You absolutely can meet someone 10,000 times richer than average. Confuse the two. Treat a fat-tailed danger like a tidy bell curve, and you won't be a little wrong. You'll be wrong by orders of magnitude. In the Second World War, a woman named Vera Atkins holds hundreds of lives in her hands. As second in command of a British intelligence unit, she decides who gets sent undercover into occupied France and where. Failure there doesn't mean getting fired. It means death. The average life expectancy of one of her radio operators in the field was 6 weeks. She has no certainty. Her intelligence is grainy photographs, notes passed through a dozen hands, radio messages tapped out under terror. So she does the only thing she can. She assigns weight to every factor and makes a cold, probabilistic bet on each person and each target. Who speaks fluent French? Who breaks under pressure? Of the 400 agents she sent into France, 100 were captured and killed. That number isn't a verdict on her skill. It's the whole point of the model. Probabilistic thinking never promises you'll be right. It only gets you into the ballpark. Lets you say, honestly, I don't know for sure, but based on the evidence, there's maybe a 63% chance. In a world of relentless uncertainty, that honesty is a superpower. The mathematician Carl Jacobi cracked problems that stumped everyone else, and he left behind a 2-word method: invert, always invert. That's the 7th model. We're trained to charge straight at what we want. Inversion says, turn the problem upside down. Instead of asking how to win, ask what would guarantee that you lose, and then simply avoid all of it. In the 1850s, in the hospitals of the Crimean War, British soldiers were dying at a horrifying rate, nearly 1 in 4 that first winter. Florence Nightingale, remembered as a nurse but also a brilliant statistician, didn't ask the forward question, how do we heal these men? She inverted it. What is actually killing them? Her data pointed not to battle wounds but to filth, to the sanitation of the hospitals themselves. Clean the wards, she argued, and stop killing your own soldiers. The death rate fell from 23% to 2.5%. It works everywhere. Charlie Munger built a fortune less by chasing brilliance than by relentlessly dodging the standard ways people fail. His advice for staying sane and solvent was almost comically simple. Crazy is more common than you think. Just avoid it. Avoid it. Avoid it. Medical students learn a strange little phrase. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Flu-like symptoms almost always mean the flu, not Ebola. That's the 8th model, Occam's razor. When 2 explanations both fit, the simpler one, with the fewest moving parts, is usually the right one. The more complicated the story, the more skeptical you should be. Los Angeles once needed to shade a 10-acre reservoir because sunlight was turning the treated water into a carcinogen. The engineers dreamed up giant tarps and enormous retractable domes, massive, expensive, impossible. Then a biologist suggested something almost insultingly simple: floating black balls, the kind airports use to keep birds off runways. 40 cents each. No construction. Millions of them poured across the water, and the problem was solved. But, and this matters, don't force it. Some things really are complicated. A Ponzi scheme isn't simple. Powered human flight isn't simple. Occam's razor is a tendency, not a law. Prefer the simple explanation until reality tells you it isn't enough. Never carve away the complexity that's actually there. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and your first thought is, what a jerk. He did that on purpose. But think about what on purpose would actually require. He'd have to notice your car, judge your exact speed, calculate your path, and swerve at the precise instant to make you brake without causing a crash. That's a lot of effort. The far likelier story, he just didn't see you. That's the 9th and final model, Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what is more easily explained by stupidity or carelessness or simple human error. Assume the least intent, because when you assume everyone is out to get you, you become the paranoid center of your own universe, and you miss what's really going on. History pays a brutal price for forgetting this. In the year 408, The Roman Emperor Honorius had his greatest general, Stilicho, loyal, brilliant, the man holding the barbarians at bay, executed, convinced he was secretly a traitor plotting for the throne. He almost certainly wasn't. But with Stilicho gone, the empire's defenses unraveled. 2 years later, Rome was sacked for the first time in 8 centuries. An assumption of malice helped bring down an empire. October 27, 1962. The height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world is one bad decision from nuclear war. Off the coast of Cuba, American destroyers are hunting a Soviet submarine, B-59, and they've started dropping practice depth charges to force it to surface. What the Americans don't know, that sub is carrying a nuclear torpedo. What the crew of B-59 doesn't know, those charges are only warnings. Moscow never told them. So deep underwater, explosions hammering the hull. The exhausted Soviet crew does the natural human thing. They assume the worst. They conclude war has already begun. The captain wants to arm the nuclear torpedo and fire. But launching it requires all 3 senior officers to agree, and one of them, Vasily Arkhipov, refuses. In the most pressure-soaked moment imaginable, he does what 9 mental models were quietly built for. He doesn't assume malice. He weighs the odds and the second-order stakes. He insists, surface and contact Moscow first. Because assuming the worst here wouldn't cost 1 life, it would cost billions. One calm man, refusing to mistake ignorance for attack, and the world is still here. He wasn't called a hero for 40 years until the records were finally unsealed. That's the quiet power in these 9 lenses. The map is not the territory. Know your circle. Reason from first principles. Run the experiment in your head. Ask, and then what? Think in probabilities. Invert the problem. Cut toward the simple, and assume stupidity before malice. No single one of them is enough. They're not rules to memorize. Charlie Munger called them a lattice work, an all-star team of lenses you learn to look through together until knowledge finally hangs on a frame instead of rattling around as loose facts. And you can walk around a problem in 3 dimensions instead of 1. But even all 9 will fail you if you lift them off the ground. Understanding isn't the finish line. Antaeus only had power while he touched the earth. You have to test these against the real world and then actually change what you do. So come back to those 2 young fish, still swimming, still asking, what the hell is water? The water is every assumption you never noticed you were making. You'll never see all of it. But every lens you learn to look through clears a little more of the blur. And in life, in business, in the decisions that quietly shape your whole life, the person with the fewest blind spots wins. If this cleared some of your water, the next book on our shelf goes deeper still. Keep your feet on the ground, and we'll see you in the next one.